sociology students. It's me, Holly. I'm still here in our remote classroom. And today we're talking about the first of the big sociological theories and how it developed. So the first sociological theory is called structural functionalism, and it develops through a guy named Durkheim. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Durkheim and how he got to this structural functionalist theory. So Durkheim, he actually was a student of Spencer. If you haven't already watched the video on those early sociologists, it's kind of interesting. But he was a student of Spencer. He wanted the sociology thing to develop as a discipline. And so he thought if he could take the most like individual or like most like self-involved without a lot of social stuff going on, if he could prove that that's actually a very social phenomenon, then people would realize how useful sociology could be. So his idea for studying a very individual thing was suicide. So Durkheim, early on, one of our first sociologists, he decides to study suicide. And I have the book for you to show you. It really is just a book. I usually bring these books to class so you can kind of thumb through, but I'll just show you today on YouTube. But the cool thing about showing the books is, A, it shows that these ideas are just from a dude who wrote a book. Right? It's easy to think of, I don't know about you guys, but when I was taking all these classes in college, I was like, oh my God, like there's all these like gods of education. Like they're so smart. And like, I could never be that smart. There's geniuses or they're just so special. But we got to remember that they really were just people and they just wrote books. And then people read those books and the ideas kind of flourished. And that's how we got the higher ed system that we have now. So you guys could absolutely read this book. You could check it out from the library. I could let you borrow it sometime. It's kind of painful, but it is still just a book. You could absolutely read it. Also, the other thing is you could write a book. I know that seems crazy, but you guys have it in you. Each one of you listening to this right now, you could sit down and you could write a book, and that book could have some ideas that change the world. So when we're talking about all these big theories, I think it can make you feel real small. And I hope you don't feel small. I hope you feel empowered, that you got some ideas, you could mix those ideas with other ideas, and you guys could write a book and you could have a theory that really helps the world out and maybe changes things. So pretty cool that all of these ideas I'm telling you about is just because I read this book and now I'm telling you what I read and sharing it with you. Pretty cool. Okay, so Durkheim, he writes that book on suicide. Durkheim, it's a pretty good early sociological study. He has some statistical problems and probably some biases in there, but he does a pretty good job of trying to be scientific about his study of humans. And he does come up with some interesting findings. He finds some things about suicide and the social world that are like still true today. For example, people who have a job are less likely to take their own lives. That's still true today. And Durkheim found that in his book. So pretty interesting, pretty cool. He also, in the process of studying suicide, he comes up with basically 4 different social reasons, we call these types, that people might take their own life. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to go through those different types of suicide to try to explore these social factors that go into such a personal or individual experience, like taking one's own life. Okay, so the first one is anomic suicide. Have you guys heard the word anomie before? It means a sense of hopelessness. Like if you're feeling anomic, you're kind of like hopeless and lost in the world. So Durkheim says that an anomic suicide is when somebody does not have to follow the norm. So I'm just going to put no norms. You might be asking yourself, what are norms? That's a good question. Norms are just rules for behavior. we are going to talk a lot about social norms in this semester. But norms are just rules for behavior. So, like this right now with my hands, that's okay, right? But if I start doing all this stuff, you're like, oh God, Holly, you got to stop that, right? That's bugging me. But this stuff, that's okay. It's a norm, it's a rule for behavior. It's okay to do this with your hands while you're talking. Do it now with me, everybody. Okay. So, anomic suicide is when somebody doesn't have those norms or they're not following the norms. So you might be thinking, why would somebody do that, Holly? I have an example for you. The classic example of anomic suicide is a celebrity. Have you ever wondered about those celebrities? What's their deal, right? Like they haven't made. Why are they taking their lives? It's anomic suicide. They don't have any norms. I have an example for you. So, like my friends, I love my friends. They're great, but sometimes they kind of bug me, right? And I hope I'm not the only one. This happens, right? But when that happens, they're kind of bugging me. I still follow the norms. I try to be sweet to them. I still call them back. We still make plans because if I lose my friends, I'm not going to just get new ones the next day, right? Like making friends is tough. It's hard to find friends. So I stick to the norms, even when they're bugging me, even when I'm not like, oh, I don't want to, but I'm going to, because I want to keep my friends. Now imagine if I was a celebrity, right? And I had like some assistant and they could just call up people and be like, hey, want to be Beyonce's friend? Sure, I'll be there at 15. And you could just have friends, like, you just have a line, right? Maybe some celebrities do have just lines of friends, like just ready to go in case they need a new entourage or whatever, right? Now, regular people, we don't have that. So we have to follow the norms. We have to be nice to our friends. We have to be sweet to them because otherwise they'll leave and then we have no friends and it's really hard to find friends, right? But if you're a celebrity, you don't have to be particularly sweet. You don't have to follow the norms. Now, the problem with that, though, is that you start to realize that the people hanging out with you, they're only hanging out with you because you're a celebrity, right? Like an assistant just called them and said, like, be here in 15 to be Beyonce's friend. And they're like, woo, right? But they only did that because they want to be Beyonce's friend, not because Beyonce's cool or special or they really know her, right? The relationship is really thin, right? Where even though my friends sometimes drive me crazy, sometimes do things, right? But our friendship is thick, right? Like we have tons of shit that we've slogged through. We really care about each other. But if you're a celebrity and you can just call new friends at any moment, really a thin relationship. Okay, think about drug use. Another example where celebrities, you think like, woohoo, I want to be rich, I want to party, this could be fun, right? And it might be fun for a little while, but pretty soon you start to feel like nobody cares about you, right? Like if I am out on the road, high as a kite, like the police are going to take me to jail and I'm going to spend time in jail, right? But imagine if I'm a celebrity, right? Like I'm, I don't know, who's a cool celebrity? If I'm some cool guy like everybody loves, right? I'm out on the street high as a kite, right? A policeman might roll up and say, hey, can I get your autograph? And then they'll let you go. That might seem like, ooh, yay, right? But it's not ooh, yay, because then you start to feel like nobody cares about you, right? Like they all just want your autograph. They don't really care about your wellness, about if you're doing okay in the world, right? So it can feel real lonely real fast. Okay, I'm going to shut up about this after my last example. Robin Williams. Have you ever thought about Robin Williams? Right? Like, so funny, right? A funny dude. However, of course he was sad in the world, right? Like, everybody always wanted him to be funny, right? Like Nanu, or whatever, right? People were always expecting him to be hilarious, expecting him to be entertaining them, right? And like, he could say basically anything. And people are just like, right? Like there were no rules for him. However, in the long run, that's very sad. Right? Like nobody knows you. Nobody really wants to spend time with you. They all just want you to perform for them. And they never really care about the essence of who you are. They're just focused on celebrity. So not having norms is actually a really bad thing, even though we all want to be rich or famous or whatever. I don't want to be famous. And really, that's because of this. I think norms are a pretty good thing, and we need some norms to keep us kind of socially glued together. We'll talk about that social glue here in a little bit. Okay, the next type of suicide is fatalistic. This is where the norms are too strong. This is kind of the opposite of anomic suicide, okay? So anomic suicide is where there's like no norms or the norms are very weak. Fatalistic suicide is where the norms are super strong. So an example of this one would be like prison suicide. Right? I mean, oh God, I would do terrible in prison. If somebody's telling me like when I could eat, when I could have the lights on, what I could wear, who I could talk to, when I could see my family, oh, I would not do well in that situation, right? Like I'm a badass. Like I like to do whatever I want to do, right? Like, I don't want people to tell me what to do all the time. It'd be very bad for me, right? That's fatalistic suicide. Let's move on a little bit. So the next type of suicide is egoistic. This is what we kind of traditionally think of culturally. We kind of have this false dialogue that goes along with depression and suicide. And we think this is what we typically think of. This is weak social bonds. So for the example, I'm going to put what we traditionally think of for depression, right? So in here, rather, since we talk about these like, oh, weak social bonds, I'm going to do a little PSA instead of explaining it to you. So my PSA is if someone comes to you and they tell you they are thinking of taking their own lives, it's okay to just ask somebody. So if you think somebody is considering taking their own life, it's okay to say, just ask them. There's this idea in our society that it might put the idea in their head. That's ridiculous. If you think the idea is already there, the idea is already there. Okay. So just be honest with them and just ask. Just say, hey, are you thinking about taking your own life? Okay. And that will open such a big door to them because they've been thinking about it and they've been so lonely in that thought. And then when somebody opens that door and says, hey, let's talk about it, like that's what people need. They need you to just frankly say, are you thinking about taking your own life? Okay. So first part of PSA. Second part of the PSA is if they say that to you, or if you feel like somebody is reaching out to you, a lot of times in our society, we'll kind of push it off to other people. We'll make it other people's problem, right? We'll say, oh, because of this idea of weak social bonds, we'll say like, oh, we just need to go out and party, or oh, we just need to find you a date, or join a club. That might be what your parents suggest, right? Like, join a club. This is the worst suggestion you can give to somebody who is struggling, right? Somebody who's in crisis. Somebody who's in crisis is not going to be a good partner. Somebody who is in crisis is not going to be the president of whatever club they join, right? Like they're depressed, they're having a hard time, they're in crisis. And so going out and finding new social bonds is not a task that they're up for. And this is the hard part here. If somebody comes and they say to you that they're depressed and they're thinking about taking their own life, and they tell you that, you are their social bond. It's on you, right? Which is a heavy burden to carry. I understand that. And you can get help with that, but you need to stick with that person. You need to be that person. You can't just push it off and say, oh, you just need more social bonds, right? Like you're the social bond, okay? All right, PSA over. Yay, you're welcome. Last, we call this altruistic suicide. This is where the bonds are too strong. The classic example would be like a kamikaze flyer during World War II, or like a suicide bomber, a cult member, somebody where the bonds are just too strong, where it's not healthy. I'm going to put a cult. The suicide bomber example has a few problems because there's a lot of evidence that there's a tremendous amount of pressure that goes into somebody being a suicide bomber, that it's not just that they care about the cause so much. A lot of times they'll use blackmail, or they'll threaten family members to get people to do that. It's not like they're just committed to a cause. A lot of times they're a victim themselves, which is really complicated and hard to unpack, and we don't have the time for that today. So we're using a cult member as our example. So this is kind of the like where you care so much about other people or a cause or an idea that you're willing to take your own life, and that's not healthy, right? We want to be connected to other people, right? We know from egoistic suicide that you need those connections, but you have to value yourself as well. So if somebody comes along and says, hey, Holly, you're going to take your own life tomorrow, I'm like, no, I'm not. That's ridiculous, right? Like, I'm not that connected to you. I'm going to take care of myself. Okay, so these are Durkheim's 4 types of suicide. And what you're probably seeing in this is a little theme about how connected or how rigidly we follow the norms in society. So our next lecture is going to be about how this suicide study develops into what we call the structural functionalist. So I'll see you guys in a while. Bye-bye.